Hey, Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, spring has finally sprung in the nation's capital, and D.C.'s political elites are ready at long last to party. The White House Correspondents' Weekend is coming up, of course, at the end of the month. But why wait? A slew of top cabinet officials attended something called the annual Gridiron Dinner 2 weekends ago, which was held for the first time since 2019. 72 people caught COVID-19 at the dinner. That includes Attorney General Merrick Garland, New York City Mayor Eric Adams, Senator Susan Collins, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, and Representative Adam Schiff, to name just a few. A super spreader event, if ever there was one. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tested positive recently as well, just 2 days after she attended a crowded event at the White House with President Joe Biden and former President Barack Obama. According to the College Fix, Pelosi recently posed for a photo with Georgetown University President John DeGioia, who himself is now positive for COVID-19. Now, some students at Georgetown aren't thrilled with their president, who's clearly enjoying himself, maskless, out and about, but has now brought back the campus's mask mandate after getting rid of it for just a month ago. That's right, Georgetown has enjoyed about 3 weeks optional masking in total. So the magazine Mother Jones says that recent cases of high-profile individuals contracting COVID and super spreader events like the Gridiron Club, quote, shows that we can't just go back to normal. But what it actually shows is that you can't just go back to normal. Political elites, on the other hand, well, they're absolutely going back to normal. If cases rise, they'll punish you. Don't expect them to make any sacrifices themselves. For them, it's business as usual. For you, maybe another mask mandate, maybe some other restrictions. Philadelphia has decided, by the way, the city, to bring back its indoor mask mandate because of rising case counts. And I mentioned Georgetown just a minute ago, but also American University, George Washington here in D.C. doing the same thing. Now, some mandates that should have gone away for good proving to be quite stubborn. The federal mandate requiring passengers and personnel to wear masks on airplanes, trains, and buses is set to expire on April 18th. But federal health officials are giving every indication that they are willing to extend it once again. This is a decision that the CDC Director Rochelle Walensky is going to make. That's what Ashish K. Jha, the White House's COVID-19 response director, told the Today Show on Monday. I know the CDC is working to develop a scientific framework, he said. When host Savannah Guthrie pressed Jha to clarify whether extending the mask mandate was a real possibility, he said, quote, well, it's absolutely on the table. Let's watch that.
Hey, look, this is a CDC decision, and I think it is absolutely on the table. And Dr. Walensky is going to make her decision based on the framework that the CDC scientists create, and we'll make a decision collectively based on that.
Technically, the policy actually falls under the jurisdiction of the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, not actually the CDC. They're not responsible for travel policy or the White House. But the TSA, like most other COVID-19 compliant authorities, defers almost entirely to CDC guidance. The CDCs are our new masters. In practice, the power to compel masking belongs to Walensky, who has taken an extremely cautious approach to easing mandates in a variety of circumstances. But the policy of forced masking on airplanes actually runs counter to what industry professionals and experts say is appropriate. The CEOs of several major airlines have testified before Congress that the air quality on airplanes is better than the air quality in the ICU. So they think it would be extremely safe to let passengers make their own decisions about whether to wear a mask. It is not likely that COVID-19 hospitalizations and deaths would surge as a result. Unfortunately, the responsibility for making this determination does not rest with the individual traveler, even the individual airline. It largely rests with Walensky. This means that even though hospitalizations and deaths remain steady as cases rise, extreme risk aversion will likely continue to be the law of the land. For many families with young children, the practical implication of that policy is they cannot travel by airplane at all, since it's very difficult to force small children to wear their masks for entire flights. Masks are not a cost-free intervention for parents in this circumstance. Whatever benefits the CDC thinks this policy yields should be weighed against the very real downsides. They are real. Now, at a time when occasional upticks in cases following new waves and more infectious strains of COVID do not produce appreciably more hospitalizations and deaths, one might be forgiven for thinking that it would be acceptable to let onerous restrictions expire. But not for the elites. For them, it's parties and business as usual. For you, sorry, you need to mask your toddler if you're like to travel cross-country. That's just what you have to do. Now, there's no greater avatar of this hypocrisy than Vice President Kamala Harris. Proudly went maskless in photo ops last week. Let's watch how Jen Psaki tried to spin this.
Last question. You said on Friday that the vice president was masked indoors all day, but the White House tweeted a video showing her standing over the president without a mask on. Can you explain what happened there?
Well, I would say that the vice president and the president and all of us abide by what the CDC protocols are. It was an emotional day. It was a historic day. And there were moments when she was not wearing a mask inside, including in a photo. But she was wearing it 99.9% of the time. There was a photo, as Jackie said, and there are moments when she was human. And she didn't have a fat mask on in a photo, but she has worn the mask, and certainly that is what we want to convey to the American people.
Is it because of the photo, because it's an important day and the photo will live for decades, that we all understand? I mean, I'm wearing a mask today. I don't always wear a mask.
Yeah.
Is that the reason?
I think it was a decision made in the moment.
She's only human. She was emotional. That's the excuse. That's the best they can do. Aren't we all? Aren't we human? Aren't we all emotional? But why don't we get a pass? Only the government officials. They're the only ones who deserve this right, according to them. So it just frustrates me to no end, I guess it always will, that they're not following these rules. These rules are just for everyone else, over and over again. How many times do they have to demonstrate that the rules are just for you before people rise up in French Revolution style? Not that I'm advocating that. Don't do it. Very against the French Revolution. But
look, I think there's no credible argument against your very good point that this is a policy that's not being uniformly applied across the board. I mean, we could all remember the Gavin Newsom moment where he was dining in the thick of the COVID outbreak. We remember recently the State of the Union that seemed like a kind of theater of masklessness when, of course, everyone involved, all of the
and they're old people. They're old
people. They're old people, but they also were all tested and had access to the best test immediately before going into the room. So there was this kind of misrepresentation of safety level to try to give a veneer that everything was okay. So I'm totally with you on how unfair it is to expect regular people to adhere to one standard and elites to adhere to another standard. But I'm curious whether you think that the response should be to hold elites to the same standard of accountability rather than lower this masking standards for everybody else.
That's what it should be. No masking for anyone. And I don't care if you're not masked as long as you are not an advocate of these policies, is my general response.
Do we know anything about what my masking, hypothetically, in a plain environment, does in terms of preventing you from getting COVID? Or is your own mask sufficient safety protection?
From what the CDC has now recognized, and we can only go through them, has recognized the benefits of one-way masking, that if you want to protect yourself and you wear one of the very sturdy masks, you have a great deal of additional protection in it, in addition to vaccination, which is the main thing you can do for protection from severe disease, and that's pretty good. Yeah, could we bring down cases? Probably somewhat even more, maybe a little bit more than a little bit, if we made people, mask themselves to the point of not being able to breathe, sure. But but why? So they're going to have the White House Correspondents' Dinner weekend. They're going to have tons of parties. We know people are going to catch COVID. The cases are going to rise. So if your view is that we must do whatever it takes to bring down cases, which is not a view that I have, but if that is your view, I don't know how these things can go forward. But they're going to do them. They're absolutely going to do them, and then maybe DC might have some uptick in cases as a result, and then what? They're going to mask schools again because they did this? It seems really morally fraught.
Yeah, look, I was in actually Philadelphia last weekend, and I observed some spaces where I definitely felt like 10 out of 10, statistically, someone in this room has COVID. Yeah. And very few people in this room are wearing masks. And I do think that there is this weird kind of social pressure against wearing masks at this point, even in very liberal environments, because if no one else is doing it, it makes you seem like kind of an alarmist and insane. Yep. But also, the logical part of my brain said, statistically, 100% someone in this room has COVID, and a lot more people are getting it. So I hope that the CDC can boost its credibility by not, turning a blind eye to these kind of class-based inequities and also the inconsistency with a lot of the advice that they've been giving out recently.
Good point. All right, well, the rising panel will join us next, so stick around.